They're Australia's best, worst sellers. The Mazda, Ford and SsangYong cars and SUVs that might be off your radar but deserve consideration. Yes, it's time to strap in for another edition of the CarsGuide Podcast, the show that takes you beyond the test drive. This is episode number 207, The Cars We Hate to Love. I'm CarsGuide Deputy Editor James, and joining me and looking at these quality new car options hiding in plain sight are News Editor Tung.
Howdy.
And key contributor Chesto.
Howdy all.
We'll also look at the fresh metal we've been driving this week and dive into your feedback. YouTubers, if you want to plot your own adventure, you can jump ahead courtesy of the time codes in the notes below, and you can click on the chapter markers in the timeline. So let's get into some cars we think deserve more attention.
Mm-hmm.
Our very own Byron authored a story this week looking at cars that deserve more attention, more sales. He thinks they're better than their scorecard in the monthly registrations would indicate. And he said, he drew an analogy. He said, some beloved artists are only appreciated decades after they've shuffled off this mortal coil. Vincent van Gogh died a pauper. Are we missing some absolute gems that are, magnificent sales losers? And he looked at 7 cars, and I thought it would be fun for us to step through each of them, and then maybe at the end talk about what we might be able to add to the list.
To be fair, Jesse, I do think linking SsangYong to Vincent van Gogh might be a bit of a stretch.
That was his early years where he was experimenting. Let's put it that way. But they're worth a lot, those early SsangYong Van Goghs. Or should I say Van Gogh? Yeah, all right, now, the first one that Byron called out is, I got to say, over time and over successive generations, a favourite of mine, the Ford Fiesta ST.
Classic little thing, yeah.
And it's like the last Fiesta standing in that it's the only one. There used to be various versions, but now it's a 6-speed manual, little firecracker, 3-cylinder turbo, pretty decent level of equipment. And as Byron says, big personality. Just 321 of them sold so far in 2021. What do you guys make of that car?
This one's a bit of a head scratcher, right? Fiesta ST is a critical darling amongst, our peers. I think everyone who's driven that car absolutely loves that car. It's at a really affordable price. I would take one, over a GR Yaris, certainly. And when you're driving it on the road, that difference in performance is not noticeable. And it's probably going to be the last Fiesta that we see here. So it boggles my mind that more people aren't flocking to this car.
Do you reckon it's a GR Yaris competitor? I think the GR Yaris is a couple of tiers up in terms of its outright performance. Is it not more a Polo GTI or? Look,
you're absolutely like right. I would say on the road, driving it day to day, you're not going to notice the difference in performance between the two.
That's fair. Yeah. Okay, I get you.
I actually think it's more about the hype. I think Ford, to its credit, it sells a lot of Rangers and is deemed by many to be a Ranger company. So really, you could kind of look across the broader Ford portfolio and see plenty of unloved heroes there that they don't sell many of. For some reason, Ford has become the sort of Mustang and Ranger company, and in later years, almost exclusively the Ranger company. So I just think when the Yaris came, there was so much hype about it. There was so much excitement that people wanted to get behind the wheel of this thing, that people were booking it before they were putting deposits down before they'd even driven it. You just saw that level of excitement around the Fiesta ST, perhaps because it's a continuing model rather than an all new one, but it's certainly an unloved gem. I think it's an awesome little thing.
Yep. I got to say, I preferred the previous generation, the naturally aspirated car. Somehow it had that extra sense of cohesion about it. And that's just the difference between an Atmo engine and a turbo, I suppose. But this current one is still a ton of fun. It's one of those cars where just in day-to-day driving, almost to your point, Tung, you can have a heap of fun in it. Yeah. Just going from one set of traffic lights to the next. There's a sense of engagement and involvement that puts a smile on your face. You don't have to be going off to your favorite road. It's just a day-to-day joy to drive.
And the truth is you never do. I mean, that's the reality. Whether you're buying a Porsche 911 or a Fiesta ST, this concept that you're going to be constantly driving Alpine roads is a fallacy. You're going to be constantly stuck in traffic and occasionally, very occasionally, be able to put your foot down somewhere. So question without notice, and perhaps a controversial one, Are they bad sales? I mean, it's
Okay.
it's a micro segment. It's a hot hatch. It's so you're basically in a tiny little vehicle segment, then you're splintering it further down into the performance end. So
Yep.
what does a question we don't notice because I don't know the answer. What does
Yep.
the Polo GTI sell, for example?
Hold on.
Tough to know, isn't it?
Because I don't think we get a breakout
of
GTI across Polo. So Polo in a month is currently selling about 350 examples. So as to what proportion of that would be GTIs, I don't know.
So I think a great indicator is going to be when Hyundai i20N starts hitting the market, and that's a more apples to apples comparison, isn't it?
But I've driven the prototype of that thing, and which by a Hyundai prototype is basically a finished car with some stickers on it, and it is very good, really fun.
All right, well that's a fair point, Chester, because Polo as a whole is not selling a whole lot more than Fiesta ST. So. Yeah.
Well,
okay.
Actually, so Polo did 350 in a month. Fiesta ST did 220.
Oh, sorry. So far this year. Yes, that's a huge difference. Beg your pardon. Massive egg on my face. Okay. Now let's move on to the next car that Byron's called out, which is one of two Peugeots that has made this list, and it's the 3008. And Byron characterizes it as a mainstream SUV with gorgeous design, stunning interior, excellent dynamics, family-friendly practicality, real refinement as opposed to synthetic refinement, and oodles of personality. So, and he's saying that people are opting for your mainstream usual suspects like an Audi Q3 or a BMW X1, even Lexus NX and Volvo XC40. So what is it about the Peugeot 3008 that people are missing?
I can answer this one for you.
Go for it.
I agree with everything Byron said. I think that's a cracking car, right? Controversial viewpoint number 2 for the morning. People say that Australia is this hyper competitive vehicle market, right? I don't believe that's actually true. We have, I think somewhere in the vicinity of 25% of new models that are sold in this country are Toyotas. So that takes a lot of the market away. Then really the remaining sort of top 8 brands fight over the remaining 75%. Anyone outside that is really just an outlier picking up the scraps, realistically, right?
Sure.
So, and Peugeot falls into that category. It really is a fabulous car with a fantastic interior, super practical, super stylish, and super premium feeling. But there's not that many people left after you take out your Volkswagens, your Audis, your BMWs, your Mercedes, your Toyotas, all those sort of top 10 brands. There's not that many people left to have.
That's an interesting point. I suppose it's an interesting point you raised. But if you're a brand looking to come into the Australian market, that's what you're weighing up.
Yeah,
it's a great way of putting it, but it is very competitive amongst those, seagulls on the edge fighting over a chip.
That's right.
Yes, but amongst those brands, I would argue Peugeot is pretty much invisible.
Yeah.
We do our bit and we cover those products because people want to know about it. But in terms of mainstream mass communication, mass marketing of the Peugeot brand, it's completely missing in action. It's just not on people's radar.
But they're not overly cheap anymore either, Peugeots. They are sort of asking premium prices. And I do think there's a feeling of the reason Toyota sells as many cars as it does, for example, is because people like familiarity. There's a ghost in your house, Tung. Just I don't mean to alarm you. But there's a sense of familiarity and comfort in buying a vehicle from Toyota, for example. And same on the premium side. There's a feeling of comfort in buying an Audi, a BMW, or Mercedes. But when you're talking about dropping significant money on a premium brand that you don't know that much about and isn't really sort of fighting in the top tier, I guess it does feel like a risk for people.
I mean, that's the thing, right?
Resale.
Yeah.
I'm going to buy a RAV4 because I've bought a RAV4 in the past, or, my sister has a RAV4 or my neighbor has a CX5. I'm going to go for what's safe and what I can see and what's known.
Yes.
Unfortunately, Peugeot is just a little bit too invisible and a little bit too niche.
It's interesting. There are little veins of that with Peugeots in that I've come across families that just hand down their Peugeots, never sell them, and they end up with, multiple cars. And they love Peugeot because they trust it. But yes, that's not a broadly held sentiment.
And that's not an attack on Peugeot, by the way, because I actually think they've never been a better brand. They are making really good cars now that do compete on every level, So it's just about that brand recognition in Australia, I think.
All right. Well, let's move to a brand that does have some salience in the market. And Byron kicked it off by saying, quick, can you name another six-door wagon? And the answer to that question is the Mini Clubman. And he's saying it has so much in its favour, unbridled Britishness, BMW brains and bonkers packaging, his words, not mine. And yet it sells in small numbers. He sees it as the coolest new Mini there is, alongside, again, to quote Byron, the unrelenting twee retro silliness of its siblings. So BMW shifts 10 times more of the similarly priced 1 Series than you do of the Mini Clubman. I think I don't see the retro twee retro silliness. I quite like new Mini in any of its iterations.
Yeah,
but it's just not on people's shopping lists.
I can answer this one too. Sorry, I have to jump in here, right?
Cool.
I do think it's like Fiat when they did the 500X and 500L and all those things. If you are buying a Mini, I think you want that retro sort of micro car Mini feel. I think that's really what you're shopping for. If you want a bigger car, and for that money, you can walk across to BMW or to Mercedes or to Audi or to any other premium sort of player and get a similar vehicle for the same money. What you're buying with Mini, in my opinion, if I was ever to buy a Mini, and I'm like you, JC, I love the new Minis and the old ones and everything in between, but I would be shopping at the small, the micro car end of the market because to me, that's what Mini is. Mini isn't a bigger car maker, right there in the name.
It goes against its brand philosophy, doesn't it? And I'm sure if you look at the sales charts, it's the Countryman, it's the Clubman. They're the ones that are selling in lower numbers compared to the hatch and the smaller micro size of that car.
It's interesting, isn't it? I think there was a period there where BMW got a bit greedy with Mini. That they'd had some success with it and then started to splinter it off into all of these derivatives.
Mini Coupe.
The low point was the Mini Roadster or the Coupe or those two. The one that had that baseball cap backwards. That was just crazy. They were trying to make a BMW out of Mini, and it's not that. So maybe the Clubman is just a byproduct of that kind of, we've got to make lots and lots of derivatives because that's what we do, rather than sticking to your knitting. And doing, small fun cars.
I also think, for what it's worth, that like the Fiat 500, which I think is this timeless vehicle design, and like the Mini, the new Mini is great representation of the old Mini, in my opinion, the small micro car. But the bigger that design gets, the worse it looks, in my opinion. The more you try to stretch the angles and stretch the dimensions, the worse that design gets,
Well, once you see an image of a current, new Fiat 500 next to an original Cinquecento, it's massive. It's so huge. That little Fiat was tiny. It was just barely a couple of people with a steel skin around them. And even the Mini, the base, little, what do they call it? The hatch is enormous compared to an original classic Mini. So to make them even bigger, I take your point, Tung. It does go against the ethos of the brand. And as you say, Chesto, it's written on it. It's meant to be Mini.
That's right.
Okay, that's an interesting take on it. Well, here's Peugeot's second player in Byron's list. And I know, Chesto, I remember you drove this car at launch, which is the 508. And, Byron says striking, stirring alternative to more mundane sedans, even, European sedans like the Passat or out of Japan like the Accord. It's just that sedans aren't a thing. People are buying SUVs hand over fist. He says it's low slung, sleek. It's great to drive. It's a sports sedan, but they're just not interested in non-German Euros. And 89 of them have been sold in Australia so far this year, which is barely worth turning up, isn't it?
Yes, that is tough. But mate, it is a good-looking car, and wagon form especially. But it's a really nice car to both look at and drive. In fact, my wife still describes it as the best-looking car we've had in the house.
Fantastic.
She loved it.
Well,
so
to me,
it's just the wrong market.
The German, you cannot kind of divorce a car's ethnic origin from its appeal as a brand. And Germany is known as a country that has terrific engineering and all of those things, and that plays out in the cars that it makes. German engineering, it counts for something. France is about fashion and art and food and all of these great things, but not necessarily cars. It's just not a car making nation. It's definitely European, and there's a certain amount of cachet that goes with that.
That's right.
But Germany owns the kind of well-engineered car thing. And so aside from the fact that Peugeot's good at little hatches and smaller SUVs, and this is a larger vehicle, there's just not that immediate association between France and great cars.
But never discount the power of the badge either, JC. You know, we know that we know that at least part of the reason people are parking a BMW, Mercedes or Audi on their driveway is so people can see the badge BMW, Mercedes or Audi. Now, does Peugeot necessarily have that same instant brand recognition of like, oh, gee, James is going pretty good. He's got the new BMW.
He's got a Peugeot. Oh, no.
What is that?
Oh, that's right.
You know what I mean? That plays a factor too.
I find that interesting, Chester, because often you'll hear people justifying their purchase of a premium Euro car. Oh, look, it's all about the safety. Yeah. And it's all about the engineering and the quality. And it's about the value. No. It's about the badge on the bonnet. You know, when you really cut to the chase.
Such a shame, isn't it? Because I think that 508 looks better than like a 3 Series or a C-Class, you know. I'd have one of those parked on my driveway over any of those German competitors. And it's way cheaper as well.
And mate, if it's about safety and reliability, let me walk you into this Kia dealership where you'll get all the equipment and a 7-year warranty. If it's only about safety and reliability.
Couldn't agree more. All right, now let's move on. Now, the Alfa Romeo Giulia, my experience with that car has only been positive. I think it's in various grades and what have you. I really do admire this car. It arrived in 2017, and Byron calls out the fact that there were some issues around quality. There were some glitches early owners suffered. He says that in 2021, some of those have been engineered out, took out what he describes as rubbish multimedia. It's been updated. They're being built with better materials, raft of improvements, a Series 2 facelift, and yet it's nowhere against its class competitors. And it's probably apropos of the conversation we were just having about badge recognition. But I've got to say, the number of times the Alfa brand has switched between either imported distributors or direct subsidiaries, and I've heard the speech, look, this is the renaissance for Alfa Romeo, and we're going to sell 5,000 within the first 5 years, and then we'll move on. And it never happens. And I'm would bet money on me hearing that speech again sometime in the future. Yeah. It's just not going anywhere.
I agree with you, JC. It is badge recognition, but just not in quite the same way. I think that Alfa Romeo had a chance. I love Alfa. I think everybody loves Alfa. If you like cars, you like Alfa. It's this passionate Italian brand. You want to see it do well. But the fact that they relaunched that brand with that vehicle and it had glitches, like I know they've engineered them out, but it's a much better car now than it was when it launched. And frankly, I liked it when it launched. But this whole concept of like, this is a new Alfa, that sort of questionable history of Alfa Romeo reliability is behind us. But this one still has some glitches we're working out. It's like, well, you know, that was just not the way to necessarily relaunch that brand. You know, that car should have been rock solid.
See, I think their problem is momentum. You know, there was a huge marketing push. There was this huge spend on building that platform and building that car. And, you know, to its credit, the Giulia is a fantastic car. And they just never capitalized on that. You know, you look at the playbook from, you know, BMW, Audi, Mercedes-Benz. It's like, sure, here's a 3 Series, but now here's a 3 Series wagon, and here's a 4 Series. Here's a 4 Series convertible. Yeah. And Alfa Romeo had a Giulia and a Stelvio, and that was it.
Yeah.
They couldn't carry that momentum, you know, forward in any meaningful way. And now they've just ditched all their plans and redone everything again.
Is it possibly the Alfa Romeo culture that says, you know, we've got this great car, we're not going to build these derivatives, we're going to do a QV, and it's going to be a brawny, you know, muscular performance car as a halo, and that'll help us sell the others? Is that the way?
I think, JC, so look, one thing I'd say about the Giulia and the Stelvio, especially the Q or QV or Q as it was called a little later, is they're really fantastic dynamic cars. They were really fun to drive. You know, they were so sharp, put a huge smile on your face, sounded amazing, and were so Italian in that sense. But I think the issue they had with those launch cars was that it was almost too Italian. You know, when you get into a Ferrari and it's like, oh, look, the performance is on point, it looks amazing, and yet it's got this like Atari-based infotainment system that no one can figure out, keeps glitching in and out.
Yeah, right.
Even right, because you're driving a supercar. The same kind of thing happened here. They had these cars that were amazing to drive, but the infotainment systems were a little bit questionable. The cabin materials in places were a little bit questionable. And I think they kind of temporarily forgot why most people buy a 3 Series. It's not because they want to drive down an Alpine road. It's because they're driving it to the office and they want.
Does the Ferrari Atari multimedia play ET the game, which was yeah. But
you know what I mean?
Put it this way.
Further down the list than they were perhaps anticipating.
3 Series so far this year, 3,000. Julia barely cracking 250.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there are people out there, 250, all right, maybe you can make decent money on 250 cars if you really trim down your means of delivering it. But, it's not really in the game.
I want to see them come back in a huge way after Romeo. I love them. I think the brand is – I think that Julia is sexy as hell. I just think they need an expanded model lineup now. As Byron rightly points out, changes to the Julia are happening all the time. I think they're heading in the right direction, certainly much more so when they were doing Juliettas and stuff like that. But
and the Mito.
I need to grow now, we just a bit of momentum.
Yeah, that's to Tung's point, momentum indeed. Now let's hit the 7th of Byron's picks of unloved gems, and it's a Mazda 6. So this current car has been around with updates along the way for a decade.
Yeah.
It arrived in 2012. It's about to turn 10, put it that way. And Byron says that its currency, in that people are still drawn to it in a certain number, is about the rightness of its great design. He says it's polished, sophisticated, rewarding to drive, but buyers abandoned sedans yonks ago. And the Camry dominates sedans anyway. They've got all of the market and everyone else is just squabbling over little bits and pieces. So a car that once held a lot of cachet in the market has seemingly fallen away. What do you make of that, Tung? Is a Mazda 6 something that you'd be, now as a family person, you'd be considering?
I had considered a Mazda 6 before I bought the Skoda Octavia, actually. I think if you stack the 2021 Mazda 6 up against its 2012 launch car, like it is a glow up of epic proportions. They might look similar on the outside, but the cabin materials, the interior, the multimedia system, everything is just so, it's leagues. The car right now is leagues, better than it was before. And those little tiny, yearly updates that Mazda apply to their vehicles has really turned the Mazda 6 into something that was more of a, family sedan runabout Camry rival into something that's genuinely a step above and almost premium.
Well, the next one's going to be rear-wheel drive, isn't it?
Yep. With 6-cylinder engines as well.
That's a proper premium play. They were already halfway to the premium play with that vehicle. A new rear-wheel drive platform will do exactly that. For what it's worth, I just think it was a victim of the times, that car. I've always been a huge fan of it. It's always been one of my favorite Mazda products, in fact. Yes. I just think it's, people shopping for SUVs instead, but that doesn't take anything away from that thing. It is a good car. And Mazda sell cars too, just quietly. So
it's interesting, Tung, you mentioned about the gradual improvement, which is great. Rather than saving it for a dedicated update, just continual improvements, which is fantastic. It operates in reverse as well. I remember when the Mazda 121, the bubble version, the little jelly bean 121 arrived, over time, it had spec taken out of it. And in terms of the production as well, you noticed, there's not a top coat around the paint, around the boot lid. And, there's been a bit of sound deadening taken out from here and there. And it's Endaka, this program. Just let's take a bit of cost out here and there as the model goes on. So it does cut both ways. But let's talk about what we'd add to the list. Chesto, first of all, what car would you add to the list? I feel the closeness of it.
Just behind me there. So look, I would absolutely add the Alfa Romeo 4C to that list. It was not a perfect car by most measures, but it is a proper cut price supercar. I mean, we are talking about a carbon fiber tub machine that looks the absolute business, weighs a ton, and was yours for, I think from memory, 89 grand. Which is unbelievable. I mean, you're genuinely talking like Ferrari engineering for $89,000.
And it's dramatic. When you do see one in traffic, it really catches your eye. It's a dramatic, classic mini supercar shape.
Yeah, and it's that. I think it. From memory now, it came out in 2012. I'm just looking it up actually. 2015 maybe.
No, it was earlier. I remember going to the launch.
I think the Australian launch might have been 2015 potentially.
Okay. Yep.
And then the international launch was before that, obviously. Mate, but it still, to me, it still looks timeless. We were talking before the podcast began, James, about the headlight clusters in Australia not being our favorite, but remove those, and I still think it's this gorgeous, timeless design. And the fact that you can pick one up secondhand now for around 65 grand, it remains a lot of car for that.
Could be a keeper, as we were saying, carbon fiber tub, the whole bit. It's properly exotic. And at the time, people were saying it should be a Dino. It should be, in a similar fashion to the first Dinos, a subset for Ferrari.
That it kind of almost was a Ferrari, then it almost was a Maserati, and then it decided to become the Halo
Alfa
Romeo. But if you look at the new MC20 Maserati, for example, which is going to be a lot more money, obviously, it's not a million miles off the 4C. Similar carbon fiber tubs, similar dimensions, different body shell, certainly, but it means similar that this winning formula kind of continues. If you can point me to a brand new supercar for 89 grand, I'll be shocked.
Cool. Fair challenge. Now, Tung, the challenge is with you. What would you add to the list in terms of unloved gems?
I think I'm going to go the other direction, the absolute opposite of a supercar, and nominate the Volkswagen Up. This was a quirky, micro hatchback that Volkswagen brought out to Australia in 2011, late 2011. Unfortunately, its sales were stymied by the fact that it was offered with a manual gearbox only.
Only, yes. It wasn't exactly priced aggressively.
No. From memory, I want to say it started at about 15 grand. And this was at the time where, Yaris's and, Mazda 2s were sort of hovering around that price as well. With automatic transmissions, and the Volkswagen Up just couldn't quite compete. It was on sale for 2 or 3 years before Volkswagen pulled it. But
it just died a sad death. It was just sort of ignored and disappeared.
I mean, it was well ahead of its time. It had things like low speed city AEB.
AEB,
from a car that was 10 years old, and it's getting a lot of love in the secondhand market. I myself have owned one for a few years. I know a few other journos have owned, who own Ups as well.
Matt Campbell,
Yeah. So it gets a lot of love in the secondhand market, but I wish it sold better here.
Just another case of the curse of the journo, though, Tung. So the journos all love the Up, and so no one bought it. Another example of that was the Fiat Panda, which the journos all raved about. Its incredible practicality and everything else, mate. You could not give them away. So the curse of the journo strikes.
Just like the Fiesta ST we were talking about.
There you go. Exactly.
Well, even the World Wildlife Fund was doing its best to save the panda, and nothing could keep it in the Aussie market.
The panda ran on actual pandas that do it anyway.
That's right. The one I'd like to add is it's closely related to the 4C. I think it feels like a slightly more evolved version of the 4C, and I love the 4C, which is the Renault Alpine, and it is just the sweetest, most composed, beautifully detailed little mid-engine sports car. And I seriously thought it would do better in this market than it did, that it would capture the imagination of people and that it would not take off, but sell in decent numbers, but it just never did. And Alpine as a brand was, what is that? Is it a Renault? Well, it's a subsidiary and it's got Renault bits in it. And I think it was confusing, and maybe there wasn't enough noise made about it. It's hard to invest big bucks in a niche sports car like that. But I loved that car. I think it's a dream to drive, and it was an unloved absolute gem as far as I'm concerned.
More headlight issues, in my opinion, but that's my view. I didn't like the front cluster, but that's my only complaint.
Cool. All right. Well, that's good. Let's move on to cars that we've been driving more recently, the ones that are residing in our garage. And Tung, an interesting one that is talk about finding favour. It's not hidden by any means. Fill us in on what you've been steering.
So a few days ago, I picked up an MG HS plug-in. And sure, it's only been in my care for a few days, but it's really blown me away. I'm gonna put it out there. It might be the best Chinese car I've driven to date.
Okay.
The powertrain, like for the price that you're paying, just under, I think it's about 46, 47 grand drive away, with a plug-in powertrain that will give you, around 50 kilometers of all electric driving range, and a petrol engine to back that up. The technology that you get in there, it's not, the powertrain is great. The interior is okay, but for the price that you pay, it's fantastic. It's a great value bundle.
Yeah, well, I mean, you're not alone in that sentiment. MG's gone from cellar to penthouse, really, in terms of sales, hasn't it?
Top 10 brand now.
Yep.
Yeah.
Speaking of unloved vehicles that deserve more attention, you can pretty much put any plug-in hybrid on that list, to be honest, because that is a technology that just has not captured the imagination of Australia yet.
Too much effort. It's not as easy as just a inline do-it-yourself hybrid, Toyota style.
I reckon it's not as sexy either. Toyota sort of captured the hybrid market. There's something really sexy about going electric, in much the same way that you want to park a premium brand on your driveway. You want to go electric. Plug-in hybrids is kind of hidden middle step that no one has quite embraced yet, but I hope they do.
You say it's a middle step, but I've not had to use the petrol engine at all.
No.
How many times are you driving 50 kilometers in one trip?
I agree.
Use all the juice.
I had a Mitsubishi Outlander PHEV, and I drove it from Friday to Tuesday morning without once having the engine turn on, and I was actually super excited by it. I was like, this is awesome.
Yes.
So, it's kind of you're right. It's not really a middle step, or it shouldn't be considered a middle step.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it makes so much sense. All right, well, thank you, Tung. Now, Chesto, we're going to move on to you. Very freshest fresh metal, because you've only just driven these, and the story's up on the site. Fill us in.
Yep. Reviews live today on the CarsGuide website and YouTube. And sadly, JC, I would like to give you a bit of stick for driving something premium while I've been in something working every day. But unfortunately, today it is the Audi Q5 and SQ5 Sportback, which basically just continues Audi's tradition of sportifying their SUV range. So essentially, if you know the Q5, then you kind of know the Q5 Sportback. Lots of similarities throughout. In fact, the front half of the car is very similar. It's only from the B pillar back where the roof rakes and you get that sort of sportier rear end arrangement. But the thing that I'll call out about it, I won't bore you with all the specs and details, but the thing that I point out is that actually what they've done, which I think is really clever, is they've managed to sort of sportify the design without actually costing much in the way of practicality. Rear roof space is only shrunk by 16 mil, 1.6 centimeters in the back. So I'm 175 centimeters, had plenty of headroom. It's a really good, spacious back seat. And then even at the boot, despite the raking of the rear end, even the boot's only 10 litres smaller at 500 litres versus 510 litres. So it's easy to kind of make a car look more sporty, more difficult to do it while keeping it every bit as spacious and practical. But Audi has done that here, and the Q5 was a really solid offering in that segment. The Q5 Sportback is too, though it's more expensive. You do pay more to look better.
You pay more for less space as well.
Yeah, but marginally less space, they talk, but more style.
Cool. All right. Well, look, back in your box, Chesto, because I've been steering a Merc S450 L. So Merc S-Class, the Schweinklasse, just under 270 grand. And it's a 3-litre turbo inline 6, 9-speed auto, the 4MATIC all-wheel drive system. There's another above it. I think it's the 560. So that's the big kahuna. And then you can have a Maybach if you want to go all out.
JC, when was the last time you drove a car under 100 grand?
Oh, look, mate, settle down. Because in prior weeks, I've been in very much, mass market, high volume vehicles. It just happened to coincide with Chesto being in the podcast.
See if you can figure that out. Listen, let's go back and see when the last time JC really was in an everyday car.
It's 270 kilowatts, which is enough, but 500 Newton meters, which is really solid. And that's available from 1500 RPM, that classic 1500 RPM turbo pickup in pulling power. And of course, it competes with the A8 and the 7 Series and all of that limo type thing. And it's 5.3 meters long. So this L version is 100 millimeters, 10 centimeters longer than the standard 450. It's nearly 2 tons, 1.9 tons. It goes without saying, it's loaded. It's just got every bell and whistle in the bell and whistle factory. And I think on the plus side, just little details, like you talk about the stop-start system in cars being imperceptible. This one is just imperceptible. It was operating. I was looking at the rev counter, but you could not tell when this thing kicked in and out. It was just serene in the way it took off, and yet it was using the stop-start system. The air suspension meant the ride was absolutely superb. It's super quiet. The safety is just top shelf, plenty of power. It's got the lot. On the minus, I was really surprised that it felt in areas a bit cheap. Like it's got these flush fitting door handles that when you unlock the car, they pop out and you can grip the handle. It could have moved, and one of them even squeaked. And it was a chromed kind of plastic finish around them. Your first physical contact with the car, like a handshake.
Yeah.
And you grabbed the handle and it made a noise and it moved when it shouldn't. It wasn't metal. And you just went, what? This is really oddball for a car in this part of the world. And then when you open the doors, they're big and heavy. So using this handle, you did kind of notice it. So don't want to dwell on it too much, but it also feels like a big car. It's not wallowy, but it's a car to be driven in. This is not the car to drive, and you really have to see it through that lens. So it was interesting to play chauffeur for a week because our two smallest kids were in the back ordering me around and looking at the DVD players and whatever. That was heaps of fun. But it's one of those cars where it's loaded to the gills and you're meant to sit in the back, not behind the wheel.
Did it have the 3D nav by any chance?
The which one? Sorry?
3D nav, the super special nav?
Yes, and what's more, it had the 3D instrument cluster in front of you so that say you're playing your favourite music, the album cover comes up and it floats in this 3D environment between the instruments.
Got to say, love the tech, but it did leave me feeling a bit queasy that I had to switch it off.
Right.
A bit seasick.
Yeah. Yeah, so
I was going to ask, the S-Class is the technological flagship of Mercedes. Like, what is a tech feature that really blew you away that you haven't seen in the car before?
I don't think I can answer that question because much and all as it had lots of things loaded in it, there wasn't anything that really I hadn't seen before. I don't want to sound blasé about it, but I don't think there was any real icebreaker style. Wow, this is new and different.
I think I've got one from because I drove that one myself, JC. I was impressed by its and 50% impressed, 50% creeped out by its ability to read your facial expressions. So, for example, in a car where you might select the right or left wing mirror to adjust. In the S-Class, you simply look at the one you want to adjust. Or if you look at the rear, you can do the sunroof kind of thing. So sort of knows where your eyes are going and thinks for you.
I mean, the car would be confused because you're so often in a rage. You'd be bared teeth and shouting. So I don't know whether it'd be adjusting the mirrors or applying the brake.
This is one head that doesn't want to get in, believe me.
All right, now let's just move on to some feedback that we had from last week. And the primary subject, Chesto, was built around a story of yours, which was looking at Toyota's resurgent in terms of sports cars, and the next one off the rank potentially being an MR2. And we had a render of that car. Now, Fat Man Overlanding, he spoke for a lot of people when he said, all right, bring it on. Toyota's bringing sexy back. Bring back the MR2 and Celica nameplate. A modern-day GT4 Celica would be brilliant. Just make it a real Toyota, so he doesn't want a shared model with Subaru or with BMW.
I think
we had a story this week where you found a render of what could be coming.
Yeah, so new Celica. So look, I'll give you a tiny bit of background on this whole thing. What we do know is that, and they've been saying it for years, is that Toyota want to have a three-brother performance strategy. The only question is what the third brother will be. So you've got Super at one end, 86, and then a third vehicle, whether that's the MR2, which is supposed to be smaller than the 86, or a new Celica. Either way, they're talking about it being a platform share in much the same way that Supra is with BMW or 86 is with Subaru. They've even talked brands like Porsche and Lotus for a platform share with. I mean, and when I say they've talked about it, they've mentioned those brands as brands they'd like to partner with, not that they are partnering with them. But one thing we do seem to know for certain is that there is another Toyota performance car coming. The question at this point is whether it'll be an MR2 or a Celica. Either of the renders that we've dug up so far look unbelievable. So at this point, they can do whatever they want.
Well, Miracle Beam determined that the chassis will potentially be the Lotus Emira. And Toyota will be the cheaper Emira with hybrid option. So why not? And CON, Collecting of Nostalgia, says, yes, thanks, Toyota. Toyota, thank you. So there's a lot of positivity around this. However, Geo Bloke raised the spectre of, didn't Honda make a hybrid sports car with a V6 that worked out really well for them? Now,
that's slightly different, though.
Toyota agreed.
Different.
That's a different part of the market.
Yeah.
But we know we're talking about the NSX. And for me, that was a car that was made, was difficult to work out the purpose, because the NSX back in the day was a real statement from Honda that we can do things differently, and we're going to do a V6 and it's going to be light and it's aluminium and all that stuff. Whereas this new NSX, yes, hybrid and whatever, but it felt like a McLaren, which feels like it just didn't have anything that set it apart. And it was a way expensive car. Like, you're on your way to $500,000, I think.
And those cars just do not excite me as anywhere near as much as affordable performance.
Focus ST.
Or like a prime example is, like, I would rather be driving a GR Yaris around a racetrack than almost anything else, because the amount of fun and excitement you can squeeze out of that vehicle without feeling like you're going to kill yourself is incredible, you know. So that's
interesting.
And that's the end of the market that Toyota will be challenging again. It's all about this sub 6-figure performance.
Sure. Hey, Chesto, you know, a new MR2 could be the spiritual successor to the Alpha 4C that you've been fighting for. You know?
But too soon for a spiritual successor.
any iteration of the MR2 previously, except that most recent convertible version, the mid-engine, the first really angular little one, and then the one that followed it, it was your cut price, mini Ferrari mid-engine kind of thing, heaps of fun. All right, now then we go to Grudlin 74. Great podcast. Thank you, Grudlin. I personally think it's time Toyota took the next electrifying step and go full electric. Hybrid's been with us 20 years, perhaps not a two-door sports car. Like the ID3, it needs to have broader appeal. And hold your fire, because Lofty Visions also said, great podcast again, fellas, with a thumbs up. Thank you, Lofty. While I do love the idea of a new number 2, personally, I think a new small electric hot hatch to rival the i20N, Fiesta ST, upcoming baby Tesla would be much more exciting and no doubt more popular. GRE Starlet, anybody? So, you know, could it be an electric option that really stands this vehicle apart?
Look, potentially. I don't think anyone's quite cracked the weight issue yet of EV supercars, but there's also an argument that, and look, call me a dinosaur if you will, but
you're a dinosaur.
Thank you. Isn't there an argument as well that if we all go EV in our everyday life, if every Camry and i30 and Mazda 3 are electric, can't we just reserve a few turbo petrol engines for performance cars? Can't we just have a couple going around?
It's interesting. We'll get to it shortly, but yes, there's a dichotomy at the moment in terms of particular brands and the breadth of their offering. From what would seem to be dinosaur style motivation to very much leading edge. But the money talks pretty strongly in these situations, unless you're actually regulated out of the market. But
it's also worth pointing out that an e-Starlet would be a very expensive proposition. Batteries are expensive, you know. That's
a pretty tough badge to resurrect as a performance. Anyway, Bill Catapotis, loved the show as usual. Thank you, Bill. All the regular contributors seem to agree. Yes, it would seem so, that we're getting a bit of positive feedback. That's great. On the main topic of why Toyota would go down the path of creating a third sports car, makes last week's discussion on Mazda, and we were talking about Mazda's proliferation of SUVs, makes it look logical in comparison. Like Matt, I think it doesn't make much sense. Hammer Rocks actually chipped in and said, can't Toyota do both? Can't they be the super reliable traditional and have this sporting flavour to their kind of portfolio to broaden it out? He says, an all-electric MR2, most definitely. Does the biggest car company in the world need any more ICE Halo models? I don't think so. As discussed by others here, I'd devote resources on trying to bury the electric Jesus car company, I think he's referring to Tesla, rather than resurrecting fossil-fueled sports cars. So there's another devotee or someone promoting the idea of an electric MR2. Which is interesting in that there are a lot of enthusiasts who are, you know, sports car lovers, I imagine, that listen and watch to this podcast, and there they are promoting the idea of an electric MR2. Peter Panousis, our friend Peter Pan. Thanks, guys. Another scintillating episode.
Scintillating.
That's a fantastic word. Now, this is on the electric theme. I'd love your thoughts on the news that Hertz placed an order for 100,000 Teslas and possibly even double that. I can't get my head around these astronomical numbers. Elon is a money-making machine. And as background, I'd say Elon has since said that there's nothing actually signed but it's clear that Hertz is going to buy a lot of Teslas.
150.
And it sent Tesla's market cap over $1 trillion.
Yeah.
So, which is extraordinary. But can you guys see that playing out? 100,000, Teslas to Hertz?
Well, I don't know when they'll get them.
Because the capacity is not there to do that right at this minute. That's true.
That's so. What they say is, I was reading something the other day about Tesla. Tesla's problem has never been sales; it's been production. So to find another 100, I think it's 150,000 cars now that are supposed to be going to Hertz. Is a challenge. As to why Hertz is doing it, to me, that's really obvious. We talked before about how Australia is less competitive than we think because Toyota sells so many cars here that they sort of hive off so much of the market for themselves. That's Tesla and EVs. When we talk about Tesla's electric sales improving in Australia, the percentage would have to be 90% would be Teslas of every EV sold.
Totally.
You have to think, right?
Yep.
So as far as Hertz is concerned, they'll have some of the most sought after cars in the world that people want to try, and they're just curious about driving an EV. They can go and rent one from Hertz. To me, it makes perfect business sense.
Yes.
I suspect you're right, Chesto.
Etc.
I doubt that that the entire order is going to be fulfilled anytime soon.
No, that's right. It'd be something that would play out over years, and it's a commitment. But it's just a big statement, and everyone went, "Whoa!"
It's quite obvious why Hertz picked Tesla, though. They want those headlines. They want outlets like ours to report on them and to give them a bit of airtime.
That's right.
Well, CIM Crew says Motor Trend Project X is doing an EV57 Chev. Would make Louis Chevrolet turn in his grave. This is where we're talking about e-swaps. JC would be livid. I am livid, actually, CIM Crew. And it was interesting, though. I was blissfully unaware of Project X. This is something that started in 1965, where an old Chev was bought, and let's just see what we can do in terms of upping its performance over time. And it's still going now. So it's about to get a GM E-Crate system, a prototype system dropped into it. It's had any number of engines, gearboxes, whatever over time. And now it's going to be e-swapped. And at SEMA, which is on now, right this minute as we're recording and when this podcast goes to air, Ford's put in an F-150 e-swap called the Illuminator with the Marquis crate motor in it. So I'm not a fan of e-swaps, but Greg Burville came up with an interesting point, which I find hard to disagree with. He says, interesting when Mal suggested a Citroën DS as the perfect candidate for classic car electrification. He says the 1997 classic sci-fi movie Gattaca, set in the not-too-distant future, featured just that, an electrified 1971 Citroën decapitable, driven by the luscious Uma Thurman. A great number of other futuristic-looking classics were also featured, including Rover 3500, Studebaker Avanti, and Volvo P1800E. And Birdie chimes in and said, a design made for electrification. And I can see that. I can absolutely see that. A Citroën DS convertible to decapitable with an electric motor. It was futuristic in the 50s. It's still futuristic now. I can totally see that. So, And just to round things off, Birdie kept on going, and he wanted to clarify things around the blue light disco. This has been a running theme. Mm-hmm. He was an attendee, I think, in rural Victoria in the 80s. He said it was an under-18 Saturday night disco organised by the police, yes, hence the blue light thing, obviously alcohol-free and heavily supervised, playing all the hits from Duran Duran to the Sunny Boys. And TGV, the very fast train, said 1982 blue light disco in Blacktown, New South Wales. Memories. Geez, that is almost 40 years ago. So I was an attendee at Blue Light Discos and Kangaroo Street, Manly. Fantastic.
Plenty on the Central Coast too in New South Wales.
Discovering yourself through those events. No,
you got kicked out a couple of times for discovering.
Now, with that, we have reached the finish line. So I want to say thank you, Chester.
Thank you, everyone.
And thank you, Tung.
Thank you.
And thanks to our emoji translator, pet detective, and former child, Mr. Pritchard, for keeping this podcasting ship afloat and on course. Today, he's wearing a T-shirt reading, I didn't say it was right, I said it would work. Elizabethan breeches and feet shoes, Extraordinary. But people on YouTube will know what I'm talking about.
You don't see enough britches these days.
Britches, I think it's making a comeback, thanks to Mr. Pritchard. Jump into the conversation. Cars Guide is on Facebook and Instagram, or email us at comments@carsguide.com.au. Apple podcast listeners, please take a moment to rate and review the show. 5 stars is the preferred rating. Thank you. If you enjoyed the episode, make sure to subscribe to the Cars Guide YouTube channel so you can stay on top of all our latest content. But before we go, a mate of mine in London told me he's been looking for a cheap used car, just something to get him from A to B. Only problem is he lives in Kew.
Oh, Lord.